Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Juno 2020 User Forum. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Today we're going to be looking at the Juno 2020 product and its role in the last few months. For the course of this forum, we're going to introduce, we're just going to recap on what that product is and some of the background to it first of all. We then have some guest speakers who have kindly agreed to prepare some content for us this afternoon. So you'll be hearing from them very shortly. And after that, we've got some further discussions. So that's a little bit vague. Even more vague is the closing time or the duration of the forum. But we're okay with that if you are. Basically, this is your forum. And so long as you find it useful to talk, then we're happy to stay online. So first of all, who's here? Well, I'm Kevin Sontag. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sales Account Manager for the south of England, and I'm joined by Barney. Hi, Barney, who's going to, you'll be hearing from him towards the end. He'll be closing us out. And trying to keep control of things is Daisy. Who'll be keeping an eye on Q&A and raised hands and that type of thing. Our guest speakers this afternoon and our gratitude to them goes to Claire from the University of Surrey, Lisa from the University of Portsmouth, hi Lisa, and Caleb from the University of Limerick. So they're on in that order, and I will be stopping in just a moment and we'll be hearing from them. But just a little bit of background before I hand over to Claire. We, obviously, as you know, we have an existing Juno product. So that is the access control system, obviously, that's been established for a long, long time. And our resource booking solution, whether it's room booking or desk booking. So these are Juno products that, like I say, have been in existence for a while. But last year, of course, with everything that's been going on, it became apparent that it would have been useful, it was useful to make some revisions to the product or some additions to the product. And in particular, the ability for a multiple person to book a single resource. Hopefully I'm not taking away any thunder from our guest speakers, but the previous product only allowed one person to book a resource, and then that resource was taken, nobody else could book it. What we wanted to do here was allow someone to book a library visit, for example, in order to provide a little bit more control on who was arriving. But of course, one person booking a library visit shouldn't mean that nobody else could do that. So this multiple person idea was floated. And we also linked it into the barriers so that the barriers can identify that you've got a booking and can start the booking for you, so that they minimize staff interaction with students, they minimize the amount of work that students had to do to register their attendance, and they also managed to control occupancy through authentication and that type of thing. So we're pleased to say we had 7 institutions adopt the barrier integration part of Juno 2020. 6 of those also adopted the multiple person booking function, and 4 institutions adopted the full study time product, which involves students booking a single individual desk. So the forum itself, for the rest of this afternoon, is very much customer driven. I will stop at the end of this slide. It's for you to discuss your thoughts and ideas and what you've been doing. And I think for the purpose of the guest speakers, if you can mute yourselves while they're speaking just to maintain audio quality, that would be great. At the end of each speaker's session, there is the opportunity for Q&A. And if you have questions while they're speaking, you can raise your hand through the icon, or you can use the Q&A tool as well and type your question through. But in the Q&A session after each speaker, you are welcome to unmute yourself. In fact, you're encouraged to unmute yourself and perhaps get some conversation going if that's okay. And then once the three speakers have been on, there'll be plenty of time for further discussion. Hopefully there'll be some further questions. And again, it would be great if that could actually be conversation. But again, you're still welcome to type those questions in if you prefer. We are recording this, so it will be on our YouTube channel. So obviously your participation is taken as your acceptance that you may well be appearing on YouTube. The purpose of the forum is so that hopefully you can share your experiences and perhaps take away some thoughts and ideas that you hear from some of your peers and colleagues today. And I was trying to think of exactly how to steer this in terms of content, subject content in the forum, because we understand obviously that in the current climate, in the current pandemic, there's a lot more to running a library than just a few functions in Juno. So I'm sure the conversation this afternoon will talk about other things, and we're entirely happy with that. And would like to encourage you to go down those roads. But if we have a little bit of a focus on Juno 2020, then that will keep us happy too. So I hope that makes sense. I think that's it from me. It is. So I'm going to hand you over to Claire, if that's okay, from University of Surrey.
Hello, thanks Kevin. My name is Claire West and I'm Head of Customer and Business Support at the University of Surrey. I'll just say a few brief words really about how we implemented Juno 2020, why we did it, and also our experiences along the way. Thanks, Kevin. So we have been using Telepen for access management for some considerable time, certainly before my time, so 15, 20, I don't know, a long time. And when we started looking at what it meant for us to be able to get really controlled entrance into the library space with the new COVID restrictions and the risk assessments that had come forward about how students could or couldn't spend time in the library, we knew we needed to do something specifically around access in and out and also control when we got in there. We had loads of conversations with the team about how we might be doing this. We kept coming up across the same things. I think initially actually we were quite interested in that idea of the multiple person being able to resource, but in actual fact we moved away from that and made a decision to implement study time. We just felt that with the amount of resources that were on offer to students, we wanted to be able to offer quite a granular experience of being able to book specific resources. It felt a little bit daunting at first. We have 700 study spaces available, which is about 45% of our occupancy, but we were able to secure funding from the university, and so we made a decision that we were going down that road, and in particular we really liked the idea of the barrier control. So we weren't Juno users at the time, we were still with the older ISIS, and we did also have to upgrade that to be able to do this. So we were looking at quite a tight timescale, to be fair. I think we probably got funding around about May, something like that. And so with that, we were then implementing Juno study time, which meant that every single seat we had was going to be bookable. Also, we were very keen on the development with tying into the barriers, and also we had Juno to upgrade to Juno as well in the first place. So that's what we were looking at to get it implemented by the end of September. Okay, thanks, Kevin. The next one. So how it works for us, we took the option of the, like I said, Juno study time, and that meant that students were able to book a specific study space either via the phone app or the web app. We found it relatively easy, really, to be setting the various parameters in the background. And that was particularly important because, like everybody, we were planning for a real unknown. We didn't know how busy we were going to be. We didn't know how many students were going to be using this. We didn't know how long they were going to be staying. So there was so much guesswork to start with. And we did find we had to do quite a lot of tweaking around those things, like how many hours a student can book at any one time, for example. Those have been extended because I I don't know, like most people, perhaps we'll find that out in the discussion, but we found we were a lot quieter than we had been expecting. And I think one of the things around how we anticipated, or how busy we had anticipated being, was around looking at where we needed to make absolutely sure that we weren't going to create bottlenecks. And that's one of the reasons why we absolutely really liked the idea that a student cannot get through the barriers without having a book study space. I think that offered us a real element of control, because all the time we kept looking at it when we were thinking about other ways of booking, we kept coming back to this idea that if we had to check it in any way, immediately we're talking about potential bottlenecks and congestion, and this was just something we were desperately trying to avoid as part of kind of safe use of the building, and making sure that we weren't creating the congestion of students all in one space. So that was a really important one for us, that idea about not getting into the library unless you have a book study space, and actually checking people in on entering. The other thing we were quite keen on our students' union as well. I think they were really concerned with the idea that students might be booking space and that it might get to the point where there were still spaces available but their quotas have been used up. They were quite worried about this kind of equitable and fair use of the space across the board. So the other thing we have been able to do is put in place a extension of bookings, which is done through the app as well. So that was extremely useful. Thanks, Kevin. I just put a few pictures in as well so you can see what the space. Obviously, part of the rollout is about tying up what a student's booking with a specific desk and actually enabling them to get there. So a lot of the work that we had to do around the physical space, which I know everyone's probably been in the same boat, was just about being able to enable a student to quickly tie a book space with a space within the library. So just, you know, the real basics and the real practicalities around what do the seat signs look like, how are they going to work, are they visible, are they viewable, can you see what's going on? So, you know, we chose these kind of quite large A4 signage, and they fit onto pods and they fit onto desk screens, and they hopefully enable some kind of sense of student wandering in to know. We kept it very simple with our names and our numbers, level 1 seat 1, level 1 seat 2, etc. So that was just the way that we did it. I thought to show a few pictures of that. Thanks, Kevin. So overall, what's working well for us? It did take a while for students to embed. There's certainly that tying to the barriers. We had some real issues with it in terms of a lot of student and user error. To be fair, when they were booking at first, meant that we just had a constant stream of students who couldn't get through the barriers. So we had to keep turning that off while we got to the bottom of some of the user areas, some of the various tweakings that we need to do. So there was a pretty hectic couple of weeks, I have to say, during which we had to do a huge amount of troubleshooting and changes to the system to be able to get that smooth. But once embedded and students had done it once, it's relatively easy to use, and we did find that they were getting the hang of it pretty quickly, as they always do. So I would say that it had embedded over a period of kind of several weeks, shall we say, when we first went live. I do feel that it does provide us with the safe and secure environment that we really need at the moment. We haven't had any cases of COVID linked to the library. We do a lot of patrolling and monitoring, to be fair, around face coverings and around safe social distancing. So that's part of it. But I do feel this idea of just not being able to just come through at will into the space without a booked seat has really helped to create that kind of more secure environment. So that's been a big plus. Definitely track and trace, that was a big bonus as well. So we can see where a student has been sitting and how long they've been sitting there. So if we get any calls of students that have received a positive test, we know that we can provide really good, accurate information about anybody that was near them at the same time. And again, that has been a really important point at the moment. And we found it quite easy to configure behind the scenes, so it seems, you know, relatively straightforward to make those changes, which has been really important as we're constantly reviewing and chipping and changing at things like allocations of time, things like that. A few challenges that we had around the functionality of the app. Some of it wasn't quite working as we expected, so it got a little bit messy, certainly in those first few weeks, and we have had to chip away at quite a few bits and pieces to do with the app. And it had a lot of changes and it had a lot of upgrades to it over a period of time. And the user experience. So the app side of thing, I think it's fair to say, is taking a fair bit of bedding in. Setting the right limits and allowances, like I said, we're constantly regularly changing them. We don't find that difficult, but that has just been one of the things that we have to really keep an eye on to make sure that we're allowing fair use, but not kind of pushing it so that we're going to run out of allocations for students. And also we're trying to think now about how we use it moving forward as well. One of the reasons we did take it to commit to it was because we know that we would like to use booking in our business as usual. So for example, we have certain spaces that we feel would really benefit from it around exam time, or that have particular facilities and features like dual monitors. So at the moment we are doing quite a lot of thought, putting a lot of thought in as well to how we are going to use it when we move back and restrictions are lifted. So that's all I had to share. I don't know whether there are any questions or thoughts.
Thank you very much, Claire. Daisy, are you able to monitor Q&A and what have you? Have we got any questions coming through?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay. Anybody want to raise anything, or we can move on to the next speaker? Okay, so allow me to introduce the next speaker. So Lisa Jeffrey from University of Portsmouth. Hi, you're on.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks, Kevin. So yes, so the University Library reopened at the end of July last year with obviously reduced opening hours and much reduced capacity. So originally we were sort of allowed 2,500 students in the building, but our capacity had been reduced to 550. And by the end of October, our peak occupancy was reaching sort of 350. So without any system for controlling access in place, we were facing the prospect of having to turn students away or manage queues outside of the library. Now, at that point, we were only at the start of the procurement process for Juno study time. So we decided to use the multi-person resource functionality of Juno room booking, and also using the 2020 developments and the linking with the turnstiles. We had suspended our booking of our group study rooms, obviously before lockdown. They weren't big enough to allow social distancing. And since we've reopened, we've actually been using them as quarantine rooms. So we configured the parameters for the Juno 2020 to link bookings with the system. And we switched that system on at the beginning of November. We were able to obviously open up booking just before we switched the system on. And actually I was really heartened to see that, you know, students had happily sort of made bookings even on the very first day. We did put a lot of effort into kind of putting, you know, communication out to students, but we know that, you know, plenty of them don't read their emails. But anyway, it looked like they were sort of starting to get used to the booking system. Thanks, Kevin. Next slide, please. Okay, so what you can see there is a kind of slide showing the zones in the library. So what we did, we walked around the library and thought, well, okay, we're going to divide it into 14 zones. And really the reason for this is that we knew the test and trace service may have requested some of the data that we collected through our turnstiles. And we thought, you know, this would be a way to kind of reduce the numbers of contact details we might have to pass on. So obviously, you know, rather than passing all the contact details of all students on a particular floor, at least we could kind of narrow that down a little bit. Obviously, we had no way of actually policing the zones. So a student could book a particular zone, but we wouldn't know necessarily that that's where they were studying. But obviously students not sitting in the right zones would run the risk of being contacted and have to self-isolate. So we kind of sort of took that on trust to a certain extent. So what you can see there, the slide shows the zones on the ground floor and the second floor. And they were grouped into specific resource types, such as just ground floor, first floor, second floor. And each zone had a particular or specific number of PCs and desks that were available. And on the booking system, we used the kind of information feature to sort of convey that information so that students could look at a zone and then work out whether it was a large zone or whether there were plenty of PCs available. We've also got a couple of kind of additional support PCs and a couple of Bloomberg PCs, and we made those into their own specific resource types as well. Thanks, Kevin. Next slide. So compared to the kind of signage for the one-way system around the library, which was produced by the university and was all sort of very corporate, our signage for the zones was actually just really low tech. We just wanted to produce things really quickly, and we just covered the library with all of the zone posters, focusing particularly on the areas where the zones kind of began and ended to make it really clear which zone a student was in. And then from that, we also produced maps that the students could kind of take away to kind of really have a look at and decide which zone was their preferred zone to study in. Thank you, Kevin. So in terms of booking and the way we configured the system, so we actually chose 4-hour booking slots, which could be claimed at any time in those 4 hours, because what we wanted to do was give the students maximum flexibility. Claire mentioned kind of in her talk about bottlenecks and congestion, and we really wanted to avoid potentially, you know, hundreds of students all queuing up in the library atrium all at the same time. So that really kind of drove that decision. And the 4-hour booking slots coincided with our opening hours, so 8 AM through to midnight. We experimented with allowing up to kind of 3 slots a day as well, so really giving students plenty of time in the library. But we found kind of 2 slots a day sort of worked best. So we launched that, and what happened after a few weeks, so it kind of took a while to bed in, and similar to Claire really, we had lots of sort of, you know, flurries of queries at the beginning, but then students got used to the way the system worked. But the feedback that we were getting even quite early on from some students was that they just wanted to come in and print, you know, or they just wanted to kind of do something really quickly. They didn't need the 4 hours, the full 4 hours. And because we'd allowed students to come and go throughout their 4-hour slot, there was no way really when a student had finished using the library to kind of, you know, release that slot for anyone else. So what we were kind of finding was that at certain times in the day, normally kind of afternoon, evening, all of the zones were fully booked, but actually our occupancy was not as high as we were expecting. So students, I think, were booking as much as they can and then just kind of rocking up just for a couple of hours or whenever they wanted to. So we used the Christmas break as an opportunity to kind of make some amendments. So we turned the booking system off then, because although we were open over Christmas, occupancy was so low that we just thought it was fine. You know, as long as we were recording use of the library for test and trace purposes, we didn't need students to kind of book in advance. So what we did then was amend the 4-hour slots to 2 hours instead. But because we'd assigned the disability PCs and the kind of separately, we kept the 4-hour slots for those because we thought that would actually be more useful to the students that use those types of PCs. And what we also did was created a 1-hour kind of short stay slot in a zone that was kind of in a traditionally busy area, which was next to the printers and the scanners and the IT area, so that students, if they did just want to pop in and do some printing, that's what those 1-hour slots were for. The way we've kind of configured is that students do need to kind of scan in to claim each booking. So we haven't configured the consecutive booking feature. And initially this did create a few issues, because with a 4-hour booking slot, it's not quite so bad. But every 2 hours, if you have students that are studying for, you know, for a whole day, they had to sort of come down and scan back in again. And what we did initially was actually only give them half an hour to kind of claim their 2-hour booking slots. But again, that was creating a few issues. So students could claim their booking at any time during those 2 hours. So what we tried to kind of sell to them was, well, you're bound to take a break at some point. Just make sure you scan out and back in again, and that will claim your next booking slot. So that's how we kind of set that up. But alongside that, just sort of slightly off the topic, but we just wanted to kind of say that students can return books, they can collect books reserved through our click and collect service, and even they can print from their own devices without accessing the library. So we've situated all of those features or functions just inside the kind of foyer of the library. So actually we've given students the option, if they really don't want kind of book, that they can still do some of those kind of basic features, basic functions. Thank you. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Thank you. Just wanted to say finally, though, where we are at the moment. So we have managed to control occupancy, which is really good. But more recently, the university has introduced the requirement for students and staff to be able to show a negative COVID test within the last 5 days in order to access the library. So that's kind of a very recent development. It's a pilot, but as some of us may have been able to predict, that's we basically found that occupancy's dropped quite dramatically since that was introduced. So at the moment, the library is very, very quiet. We are hoping at some point to implement Juno study time, because we have sort of marked out, measured, counted, and all the study space that we want to use. But as to when that might be implemented, that's yet to be decided. Because as I said, at the moment, we've had another layer of regulation, which means that actually the library is extremely, extremely quiet. And that's it from me. So any questions? Happy to take them.
Thank you, Lisa. Daisy, what are the questions looking like?
Nothing at the moment.
Okay, I need to encourage you to ask questions. I've got a question for you, Lisa. What's the quarantine room?
So what we've done, so because the way we deal with return books, we quarantine them first and then we remove them from the borrower's account. So students can leave their books on the trolleys. We then take them up to the quarantine room, our old group study rooms, and they're removed 72 hours later for returning. So that's just, we're just following current guidance as to how you deal with books that have been returned.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you were locking students up for 2 weeks.
Yes, no, not quite that.
Okay.
We do have a question from John Knowles. How are students asked to show negative tests?
Right, so at the university, we all have access to lateral flow tests. So we go and have those done, and then 20 minutes later, we get a text message on our phones to sort of say, you know, you had a negative test. And what we have to do is we have to situate somebody just in front of the turnstiles to actually check those, check those kind of results. It's mostly done by security guards, although early in the morning library staff do that as well. But that's how we're doing that at the moment.
I've got a question from Francis. How long did it take you to do the upgrade from ISIS to Juno? You mentioned getting the money in May and having it running by September.
Yeah, that's for Claire, is it?
Yes,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we had to do it at pace, no getting away from it. I think it took about couple of months or something where I don't know, Kevin, you might be able to remember better than me, it's all a bit of a blur. But yeah, we absolutely had to have it. We had to have part of the work done before an IT freeze, change freeze, which is part of August. So we had to get the key part of the upgrade done before then. To be fair, the actual implementation wasn't too time consuming. Like I said, we were already a user of the previous system. I think what we did realise was that with the best will in the world, and because we had to do it at such a fast pace, what we didn't really have time for is testing. So, you know, if I say a couple of months, in an ideal world, that would have been longer, because I think we would have had a much longer time for testing as well. Yeah, hope that helps.
Thank you, Claire. I think just to add from our point of view, the work involved is not extensive. There is a a utility that runs on the data conversion, so it converts the data from ISIS compatible to Juno compatible. So that does take a little while if you've got a few years worth of transactions in your database. We have to upgrade the firmware in each lane, so there's a little bit of disruption in the lanes, but that's sort of half an hour per lane. And obviously we update the software, so the services and the client application. And I think for you, Claire, we changed servers as well. A conversion from ISIS to Juno is often associated with a new server, because a lot more of the Juno software is server-based than back in ISIS days. So there's often a new server involved, and then there's a little bit more toing and froing with IT to get everything enabled and firewalled or unfirewalled and that type of thing, if that helps.
And so, Lisa, a question from Samantha. Can you clarify what Juno products are installed at the moment?
Oh, what at Portsmouth?
We could do both. Lisa, would you like? Are you able to do Portsmouth?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we've got the Sentry Juno for the turnstiles and the kind of multi-resource booking. That's as much as we've got at the moment, but we'll be getting, we are working on getting study time as well. So it's room booking and Sentry. Those are the two software products. That's I'm right in marking them out like that, aren't I? And then we will be getting study time as well once we've kind of fully implemented that.
Yes, it's going through at the moment, isn't it? Study time. And you've also got Buddy.
Oh yes, yes, we're working on Buddy as well. So we're going to get our turnstiles kind of upgraded for that. So that will be coming on soon. Yeah, thank you. Forgot that.
Another question for Lisa from Francis. Do you plan to keep the library entrance bookings when you introduce study time, or will you switch to only bookings for individual study spaces instead?
I think what we were thinking about is actually when the time is right, perhaps having a section of the library where individual desks can be booked as a service enhancement, rather than having the whole library, all desks in the library bookable. So I think that's what we're thinking about at the moment. In which case, I guess, I think you can probably do both. You can claim through the turnstiles, or you can claim, kind of through the app. But we haven't really got that far yet because of the recent developments. Everything's kind of stalled there. We're just kind of keeping things going with the sort of low occupancy.
I think that's it for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions as well, everybody. But also to encourage you to do that sort of vocally as well, by all means, and get some conversation going as well at some point, perhaps after Caleb's presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lisa. I'd be interested to know from the rest of you about the point about a negative COVID test. Clearly at Portsmouth, that does require some manual intervention then at the turnstiles, which is clearly offsetting one of the key advantages of what we thought we were helping with.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to know if that's a fairly common thing around HE libraries, or if you can see it sort of being introduced. That would be good. Perhaps you can send in some comments on that as we move forward. And shall I, if there's no more questions, thank you, Lisa. Let's move on to Caleb. So yeah, all yours. Are you there, Caleb?
Thanks, I am. Thank you, Kevin. So I'm Caleb Dervin, and I'm the head of technical and digital services at the Bloxman Library at the University of Limerick. If you can go to the next slide, please, Kevin, thanks. So we have a newish library. We have an extension that we opened in 2018 with 2,100 seats, 48 study rooms, and we have about 17,000 students. And the annual footfall in the library is about 1.2 million visits. We've been paying customers since 2014, and we have eight turnstiles at the moment. So just when all this happened, the building that we're in is still relatively new. A lot of the spaces still aren't completely established. So this was, kind of working with the new space really. If you can go to the next slide, please, thanks. So I guess the main motivation for us looking at study time was a way to minimize interactions at the gates, both for staff and students. We just really wanted to limit the amount of interaction with staff and students. So I think it may have been a slightly different situation in Ireland, where we were shut for most of the summer. We ran a click and collect service, then we reopened in the autumn. So in July, the library received capital funding to purchase study time. And I think in addition to limiting interactions like the others, we wanted a way to restrict library visits to only pre-booked visits and have something that worked with the access gates. So we got approval for the project in July, and we began implementing in August. We also went from the 2,100 seats down to 600. I think slightly less than 100 of those are PCs that are also bookable through study time. Going through another series of lockdowns again, we're down to about 100 spaces at the moment. So we're in our first week of term, and just with just over 100 seats. If you can go to the next slide, please. So we had, so go back on, Kevin, sorry. So given that we got the funding in July, we were opening in September. We had a very, very fast implementation. So we had already been using Century Juno, and we did the study time implementation in about a month's time, which was very quick. Besides all the technical work and sort of technical implementation, there was a lot of the physical preparation in the library. I think a group of 4 of us spent about 2 weekends in the library labeling all the desks with sheets that had barcodes and desk numbers that correspond to what we had on in the booking system. We initially, in the autumn, last autumn, we were initially open from 9 to 9. So at that time, we allowed people 2 slots of 4 hours each a day, and then up to 4 half-an-hour library visits during the day, so people could come in and browse and borrow books, return material. In the current setting, we allow people 1 4-hour booking per day and one half-an-hour visit. There was also quite a bit of work around sort of user education, and I guess the sort of wayfinding considerations around the different rooms, and sort of directing people to the different rooms and how we name different rooms. We have student workers at the start of term that we call peer advisors. So we used the peer advisors to help with sort of directional queries with students. If you can go to the next slide, please. So on average, I think Claire and Lisa each mentioned this too. We never saw the library at full capacity. So while we offered 600 seats, I don't think we ever got above 360 or 370. Though I know anecdotally now with the 100 seats, they do seem to be booked out a week in advance. Whether people take those up or not is another story. With the reduced seats and just wanting to make sure that things were used in the best way possible, we instituted bans. So if a student doesn't show up for booking more than 2 times, they're banned for a week. And we had publicity campaigns around this, and sort of a social media, have texts and the emails that go out from study time about this. So I think we can safely say that the staff interactions have been minimized. There's very few queries about things. I mean, the system does work. People have emails to sort of confirm bookings, and there's really very little need to consult with staff. And sort of anecdotally, the students do seem to be happy with the service. If you can go to the next slide, please. So some things that we would like to work on for next autumn are the phone app. But I think, like Claire, we had some issues with it at the start, and just didn't have the time last autumn to really dedicate to it. But it is something that we want to get working. We under normal term time, at very busy times, like during exam times, we have a library campaign that we call Every Seat Counts, which is really a way to ensure that students don't overstay visits. This was in pre-booking days, because at one point in the library's history, we, as I think most libraries do, we would have issues with students leaving their coats and books at the start of the day, maybe staying for an hour and coming back at the end of the day. So we've had a service over a few years where these peer advisors monitor the floors and make sure that people aren't staying for over an hour, or they're not going for their seats for more than an hour. They gather their things and put them aside. So I think what we would like to do is to use the seat booking as a way, as a alternative to that in the future. So we would like to automate that whole process. And another thing that we would like to do when we have a chance is to implement the room and floor plans that come with study time, to show on our LCD screens what's available and what's not available. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. Brilliant. Daisy, any questions coming through? Please send in your questions for Caleb.
Nothing at the moment.
I noted you had instituted bans then. Have you had many people fall foul of that, or have they learned that they need to attend or cancel bookings?
It's hard to say, because we're still only on our first week of term, but we've certainly very clearly communicated to people that they will be banned if they don't turn up twice in a row for bookings. I should say too, maybe just to add, I think things have changed. Restrictions have changed quite a bit in Ireland, and plans from when we reopened in the autumn have changed quite a bit. So at the start of all this, we had a very ambitious plan to sort of limit access to only certain cohorts. So first years would be able to use the library one week, and second years the next week, etc. we never got around to implementing that. That is something that we're looking at doing. And at the moment, we're working with Telepen to implement a whitelisting system. So we have a very we have sort of a bespoke cohort of students that needs access to a specific space that we want them to have on demand. So we're finding a way to sort of let them in and out, and working at the moment getting that implemented.
Thanks, Caleb. We've got a question from Francis for Claire and Caleb. You both mentioned issues with the study time app. Could you expand on what kind of issues those were?
For us, it was about just some, I think it was a mixture. It was difficult when you're going at things through paper, but it was a mixture of there were some glitches, definitely. There were 1-2 technical glitches, and then there was the users taking it on board. So there was a little bit of both. So there were some oddities around a user thinking they booked a specific time, and then it didn't turn out to be, just because of the option to sort of select a time at now. I'm here now and I want to book a space now. And I think students thought they were booking further ahead, when in actual fact the app was selecting the current hour and more. Just 1 or 2 oddities. So there were some things around the way it worked that didn't feel quite so intuitive, because of quite a few different ways of actually booking through the app. There were some things which were user error. So it was around those things. I mean, to be fair, I think that's probably been it was perhaps the glitchiest part as well of the implementation. So that's what it was for us.
Yeah, and I think we had a very similar experience. So there's UI issues where, as Claire said, there's kind of different ways to make a booking, and I think students were confused which route to take. And there were a few glitches at the start that were resolved.
Caleb, another question for you from Samantha Dren. No-shows. Could you talk about your experience with the reports that you get with the interaction of Century Juno with study time?
Yes, so study time has a separate client and a separate reporting suite. So for no-shows, we generally use the report from the room booking client rather than the Century Juno client, which does have what seems to me like a fairly robust set of reports around a percentage of no-shows, which rooms and spaces they occur in, etc.
And then to follow on Samantha's asked, I guess for everybody, is anyone handling walk-ins, for example, just to borrow books?
Yeah, I can go really quickly if you want. So we have this notion of library visits, which you still have to book, but you can book at the gates if you like, and you're allowed to come in for a half-an-hour visit. But we don't allow any students to come through the gates without a booking.
Yeah, we're the same at Portsmouth. You'd have to book, but you can come in and browse and borrow books, but you'd have to book a slot to do that.
We're very similar as well. If you're in the library, it's absolutely fine to take books out. Otherwise, you're using click and collect if you actually don't need to book a study space. But we did recognise that we're 1 or 2 areas of our collections that students really need to browse. For example, we have performing arts students, and for the schools, something that they need to kind of look at before they can select them. So for some areas, and they're one in particular, there's a booking form. So a student can book to come in and to handle and browse those collections. So some of the special ones we're making special appointments for.
possibly worth mentioning as well is we have built into the system, and something this actually might become more useful as restrictions are relaxed, but there is the possibility to have ad hoc visits included within the various totals. So you can allocate them a certain amount of spaces that must be bookable, and then you can allocate a certain amount of occupancy that can be just used for people to turn up and walk in. So as I say, possibly perhaps not so useful right at the moment with the sort of heightened restrictions, but as restrictions are generally gradually eased, perhaps it might come into its own then.
Yeah, and just related to that, what we've done very recently, because we're not reaching maximum occupancy, we've actually, so staff and kind of people like cleaners and security officers, we've allowed them non-booking rights, so they can just, because they have to keep coming and going in and out of the building or in and out of the foyer, they can just swipe in and out. And it doesn't seem to, you know, we keep an eye on occupancy figures, but it doesn't seem to skew it too much. So that's actually quite a useful feature as well, just on an everyday practical basis.
Any more questions, Daisy?
No, not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Thank you, Caleb. And thank you everybody for your presentations. They were great. Thank you. Much appreciated. We've got some bullet points for further discussion that is always an option, but we've been on for a little while actually, so it's been quite good. Did anyone want to speak about their own library in the way that perhaps the other three have? Does anyone want to? Is anyone doing anything rather differently and just wants to share that with the group at all for a couple of minutes? Does anyone want to do that? By all means, volunteer. And if not, Barney, I don't know if you want to run through this last slide to see if we get any interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, hold on. So we just thought of some questions. So these might have been covered, but in any case.
Yeah, so I mean, it's possibly worth mentioning that at the outset, the design for Juno 2020, or the developments for that, and then some of this was also brought into study time, but we did run a focus group for our customers, and so that really built the scope of what Juno 2020 needed to offer. And so we've essentially lifted these further discussion points from that scope. And as one of our panelists said, that things have obviously changed since, well, March last year, since June last year, probably since yesterday. So it's perhaps interesting to see how things have moved on, and whether or not these features that were originally talked about and discussed, whether they've actually proved useful, or whether they can be added on. So I think actually we've already touched on this one, Kevin. Yeah, so use of the maximum occupancy calendar. I'm guessing from each of the panelists that you've kind of said that you've probably not reached maximum occupancy, because each of your libraries have seen reduced access. So is student allowed to re-enter the library? And this is all to do with the booking slots, and Lisa, you mentioned about initially having 4-hour book slots, and this flexibility perhaps causing an unforeseen issue, so changing the slots. Does anyone have any further comment or any interest to discuss this point further?
Yeah, I think we felt initially that we absolutely would not be allowing re-entry, and it was something we just assumed was going to be the safest, the best way to do it. We didn't want students going, leaving things, the coming and going that would entail. It just, so we did actually set that to be one of our policies when we first went live, but it was a complete nightmare, because it doesn't matter how many times you might say that, the students, they will want to go out, they will want to nip the shop, they will want to go for a cigarette, they will want to do X, Y and Z. So all it meant was getting a continual trail and circle of students who had popped out and then couldn't get back in again. So, I mean, for our own sanity, to be honest, we actually dropped that one in the end, and it didn't, and it's what students wanted to do, and it's the way they needed to be using it. So I think we were just setting ourselves up for failure almost by trying to insist that that might be realistic. And like I said, we did choose to drop it.
Thank you, Claire. And Lisa, I think you set that the other way around.
Yes, we kind of
from the start anyway, because I had
almost
two opposing customers. Yeah.
That's it, just trying to allow, because that, you know, as soon as you make a rule, students tend to kind of go, no, I want to do this instead. So we thought we'd have to allow them to come go. So.
From a system point of view, it imposes a limitation, which is if you imagine we have, say, hourly slots, for example, and a student has booked a small number of them, maybe 4 in a row or something, and they disappear in the first hour, and they plan not to come back. The system doesn't know that. The system doesn't know that they're not going to come back, and it assumes that they might, and therefore that resource is unavailable for somebody else to book. So there is a sort of a pro and a con to that function. But I think from Sarah's experiences, who've tried both, it does seem that we have to allow the student back in.
To be fair, I think a lot of these things would change if we found out we were getting really, really busy and there was pressure on space. So for us, we were able to be a little bit more lenient about things like this because we've been so desperately quiet. And if it were to feel that kind of situation that you just mentioned, Kevin, were to arise on a regular basis, we would absolutely rethink.
Yes, good point. It's a good point, because study time initially was. I'm sorry, carry on.
I was going to say same here. So we're not enforcing no shows at the moment, but if we do become much busier, then we will switch that on. And of course, that's one way to kind of curb certain types of behaviour or try and influence the behaviour of students. So yeah.
Good. I'll move on.
Types and quantities of multiple person resources. So I think each of the 3 libraries here, you've all talked about having different types of resources and the flexibility of the booking system. Has the booking system proved to have the right sort of flexibility and giving you the right options, or any other comments around that, really?
Yeah, I can go if you like, Barney. So just, I guess, for the sake of simplicity, we've treated any sort of resource in the library as a single set of resources. So we don't really distinguish between a room and a seat at this point. So, you know, in fact, when we did allow people to book study rooms, they were limited to 1 person. So effectively, it was, you know, a seat. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, this was a feature that we built into Juno for I think mainly non-study time users, but so people who were being able to book a visit to the library, and then you might not then know where they've gone, and so it gives you the ability to send them an email to say you've overstayed your visit. Have you used this feature? Does it sort of assist at all? Have you noticed that students then get the email and you see a mass exodus or running for the door?
Yeah, we use this. We certainly use the email, and the email's fairly strongly worded as well. Even though at the moment we're not sort of, you know, enforcing no shows and things, and it's difficult to tell. It's hard to know really when students are leaving, but we see that as a useful feature, and that, you know, we can only hope that a good proportion of students do kind of do what they're told. in the email. So we think it's a useful feature.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Are there any other questions at all from anywhere? Any other comments?
We have got one question come through anonymously. Don't know how that. In the future, we're expecting that seat hogging will return. Is there any new benefits for new study time customers to address this with Century Juno integration with study time?
In terms of new features, I mean, so study time exactly can be used to address seat hogging. So, you know, you're booking a specific space for a set period of time, and linked with the user display or the infographics display, it's very clear whether that seat has been booked by that user or whether it's overstayed. So those features remain and will still be usable post COVID and post seating restrictions if and when seat hogging does return as an issue. Yeah.
Richard Partridge, at DMU, we haven't yet required students to make a booking because demand has stayed within our capacity, but we're running with ad hoc occupancy for all of our 200 seats in the main library and allow multiple re-entries. We anticipate sliding into a mixed economy of ad hoc and advanced bookings as demand increases.
Thanks, Richard. So at DMU, where they've implemented Juno 2020, so the multi-person booking, but without study time. So thanks for that insight. So well, if there's no further questions, I'll close up. So thank you again to each of our panelists. We're really grateful for the time you've taken to put the content together and to answer the questions and present here. And thank you to everyone who's joined us. Hopefully you've found this forum useful. Hopefully you've had some questions answered, or you've got some insight into how these three libraries have implemented the system and how they're running currently. If you would like any further information, or if any further questions spring to mind, please do send them through after the event, and we'll be pleased to answer them or put to the panelists for their answers and get back to you. And otherwise, yeah, thank you and goodbye.